5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Carter, the IRS decided to begin enforcing the employer mandate this past fall as Commissioner Koskinen was leaving office. This was the first time that the IRS ever actually enforced that employer mandate since the law came into existence in 2010. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
If you would hit you.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. And at this point, as I understand, your agency is issuing penalty letters to employers. I understand somewhere in the ballpark of 9,000 or so letters have been sent out. Is that right?
Yes, sir, it's around 10,000 at this point.
Around 10,000. Okay. Were these employers notified prior to receiving a penalty letter? I mean, after all, we're talking years of no enforcement, and then all of a sudden, this is a pretty big change coming down the pipe. These employers are accustomed to this employer mandate not being enforced. Were they notified beforehand?
No, the letter's the first they've heard from the IRS on this.
Okay. That sounds pretty harsh, to say the least, for these folks to be living for years under no enforcement and then all of a sudden being slapped with it. Mr. George, TIGTA has examined the IRS's ability to enforce the employer mandate, and I understand that you have found multiple problems with the enforcement systems for that employer mandate. Is that correct?
That is correct, Congressman.
Okay, can you briefly explain what some of those problems are?
Yes. Our review of the IRS's process to identify tax year 2015 applicable large employers potentially liable for the employer shared responsibility payment found that the IRS did not identify 840 employees potentially subject to more than $113 million in employer shared responsibility payments. Now, the difference in identified applicable large employers occurred because the data used by the IRS were not complete or accurate. We subsequently made 5 recommendations to improve the process. The IRS agreed with all 5 of those recommendations, and we certainly shall follow up with them to see if they've enacted those changes.
Okay, so change is coming, but would you be able to say with a strong degree of confidence right now that the IRS is effectively and accurately enforcing the employer mandate?
I would say this, sir. When the IRS puts its mind to something, it gets the job done.
Well, but that's not my question. You said they've got problems. Those problems have not, the solution to those problems have not yet been implemented. So the assumption I have is at this point they can't, with confidence, say that this is being handled effectively and accurately.
Until we've had a chance to analyze the actions taken, that is correct, sir.
Sure, okay. Mr. Carter, are you familiar with the President's Executive Order 13765?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and you understand that basically that directs the federal agencies to ease the financial burdens of the Affordable Care Act?
Yes, sir.
Okay, is the IRS subject to that executive order?
It is.
Okay. It seems to me pretty obvious that it is rather burdensome for employers having no previous communication whatsoever to all of a sudden be forced with penalties on the employer mandate. Would you agree with that?
I would.
Okay. So, so based on your testimony and based on the executive order, why would the IRS be rushing to enforce the employer mandate?
Sure. So let me give you a little bit of background if I can.
Not too much. I've got less than a minute.
Okay.
I still have
All
some
right.
questions.
At this point, the letters are the IRS best estimate of what the employers owe. There have been constant negotiations as those letters have gone out. About 3,000 of the 10,000 letters that have gone out, cases have been settled, and in 82% of those cases, the employers have not owed anything as a result of the letter. What we found are 2 responses when we've gone to employers. One is the forms were filled out incorrectly, so once we work with the taxpayer, there's nothing owed. And then in the other 18% of the cases, the employers have basically said, we haven't been able to determine the amount of the penalty ourselves. We were waiting to hear from you.
Okay, but we still have the admission that we can't accurately be doing this. We have an executive order not to do it. or to ease the burden, not specifically on the employer mandate, but to ease the burden that comes with this. My question to you would be, can we cease, would you agree that we need to cease the enforcement of this employer mandate until your agency at least can straighten out the mess, and for this committee to review all the documents that we've requested?
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job, Congressman, of trying to straighten out the problems that take.
But my question is, Mr. Chairman, and I know my time just expired, but the question is, this thing needs to cease until the problems are resolved and this committee gets the documents that have been requested, and until, I mean, these employers don't even know that it's been reinstituted or instituted for them.
We're trying to work with everyone who we've sent a letter out to, Congressman, and our challenge is, it's the law. And I don't think anybody in this committee wants the IRS determining which laws it's going to enforce and which ones it's going to ignore.
But it was not enforced for 8 years, and now
not.
all of a sudden it's being enforced, even with an executive order. I thank you for your graciousness, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Cannot disagree. Thank you.